Welcome to the Adaptive Cards Community Call, the June edition. We've got a handful of things to talk about today, but a quickly recap on the community call if this is your first one. Hopefully, these are useful and the time works and everything, is beneficial. But so this call goes on every the second Thursday of every month, and the next call will be July 11th. We like to I'm Matt Heidinger. I do a fair bit of the talking, but Andrew Leader is on this call, and David Clow is also on our team. And today all three of us will be speaking, but we're the main program managers on Adaptive Cards and get to share what our team's working on with all of you. So you can find me on Twitter at Matt Heidinger. David, I think email is probably the best way to reach him, but he's around. I don't know if he's on the call yet.
I am here.
Hi. And so we're going to be your kind of main co-host today. And so the agenda for today is quick recap. If you didn't catch the build session that took place last month, you can find it here. It's not the most friendly link I've ever seen, like a YouTube link. But the deck will be live, and if you just search for Build 2019 Adaptive Cards, you can see a session that David and I gave, walking through previous stuff, some prototype future stuff, and basically all things Adaptive Cards, including an announcement of a React Native renderer from the community, as well as the Flutter one. And I saw a blog post actually from the Flutter folks this morning. I don't know if they're on this call. But they may have officially released. I just saw kind of an announcement blog post. So if you are interested in Adaptive Cards in Flutter, reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with them, or just maybe find the same blog post. But it's kind of exciting, to see this full Flutter support. So that'll happen at Build. In the last couple weeks, version 1.2 of our SDKs shipped, and yesterday adaptivecards.io was updated, so I can quickly run through that stuff. So again, the build session is right here. Adaptive Cards vNext, et cetera, so find that. But 1.2 shipped on all of our official SDKs, and we're working closely with our partners on React Native and Flutter to have 1.2 done in kind of lockstep, so pretty quickly. The React Native folks in particular have been very up to speed and keeping up with the progress. But a lot of stuff was finished in this release. Element level fallback, I won't go through all of them because we do want to get into some 1.3 planning after this. But in fact, so adaptivecards.io has been updated. So if you go to the Schema Explorer, which is basically our live documentation for, hopefully most of you are familiar with Adaptive Cards, but if not, you would go to adaptivecards.io for basically all things Adaptive Cards, or our GitHub for everything kind of planning and future and issues and code and things like that. So really these two destinations and adaptivecards.io are where you're going to find everything you'd want. That said, so in 1.1 we added this version column to our tables, so you could know what property was added in which version, so that which version you're targeting, as in you're writing a bot for Teams. Well, you would have to know that Teams currently supports 1.0. We don't have a lot to announce in 1.2 rollouts, other than we're putting a lot of pressure on Teams. We don't want the Adaptive Cards ecosystem to fracture or fragment, so we're trying to keep everyone on the latest version. We're making some good progress on 1.2. Teams is actively testing it now that it's been released. And in that, we'll actually have something to show a little later on in the call to help make this a little easier. But today, the world is, in 1.2. Oh, wait, hang on. Oh, okay, good. It was just cached. I was going to say if like a CI ran. Okay, so as you saw, my browser was cached. Well, maybe you didn't notice, but there's a handful of things that got added. So if you're not seeing the latest, you might have to do a control refresh or a control F5 and really just dump your cache. But there were some cool things added. So one thing is, for example, this rich text block. And so we tell you that this was introduced in 1.2. here are the properties of the text block, and of course we have these examples. Ignore the one encoding bug that we're still fixing, the little arrow there. But you can see a rich text block. Let's do a handful of things. We can do inline text with colors, highlighting, strike through, even monospace text. You just get a lot more flexibility. Then Markdown works great, you know, for basic formatting and things, but this was a little more structured where you can do things that just Markdown doesn't offer. So this is more of an object model form of composing text together in these things. And so this obviously would render natively on all of the SDKs that came out. So if you use this rich text payload on Android, you're going to get the same representation in Android UI. So rich text block's pretty cool. I will pause just as a heads up, because since chat's not working, I'll probably pause right after this and I'll run through these, and anyone who has questions will just kind of have to, if there's anyone, we'll just have to kind of take turns and we'll have to talk the question through, which will be great if you're curious about 1.2. So I'll take a pause after 1.2 for stuff like that. But unfortunately, the chat's not working, so we can't really do this asynchronously. So rich text block was one thing that was added. I could go through the various things, but one thing I really like to go to is over on samples, which has kind of been our inspiration board, where we just put together a handful of things like, can you build a stock card with adaptive cards? And a simple demonstration would be this fallback. It's actually hard to demonstrate fallback, but fallback is taking us towards our vision of adaptive cards, where these payloads can be durable, they could be persistent, and they can either progressively enhance on future generations, or they can gracefully degrade on, say, a down-level renderer or, you know, a 1.0 renderer. You could write a payload in 1.2 and it works great all the way up to some future version that works down level. And so to get us a step towards that, we added this concept of fallback. So the type name here, we just made it extra weird so people don't understand this doesn't exist. So there's a type name here, Steve Holt. I'm not actually sure who wrote that because I'm not sure who that is. Maybe people do. And there's a property at it. And what's happening is this new directive that every element has is a fallback property that describes what to do. It instructs the renderer what to do if this element can't be found. And that could be extended, so it doesn't have to be a native part of the renderer. For example, in this case, we're just saying drop. But for example, someone could use the extensibility APIs that we offer on all of our SDKs to extend the schema to support a graph. They describe the schema of that graph, and then they have to write code to render it. So we've had that built in. I always like to kind of mention that. Not everyone realizes that right off the bat, that the adaptive card schema, you're not limited to what you see on Schema Explorer. If you're rendering your own cards, as in you're using our rendering SDKs, you are free to extend the schema with whatever functionality you want. If you're writing a card into Teams or Outlook or the Windows timeline or any of those partners like Cortana, well, you're going to get what they offer. And in fact, in some cases, they've actually extended the schema themselves. For example, in Outlook, there's an action HTTP that works in Outlook. With fallback now, we get to this world where you can say, hey, if that element exists or if that type exists like graph, then go ahead and just render it as is and all is great. If not, we can say fallback to, and then you can describe an element or a chain of elements, put them in a container, to fall back to, okay, you don't have graph support, you know, guess we'll use this text block. An example of where this would have been useful, a practical example, is in 1.1 we introduced media. But if you send a media with video or audio to a 1.0 renderer, it's just going to drop the media. It's going to render everything else, but that media will just, as though it never existed. And so if we had fallback in place, we could have said, well, at least fall back to maybe an image, use the poster property, and maybe, you know, we can server generate like a play button over it. We could have done something to fall back to elements that existed in 1.0. Now, from 1.2 forward, we will be able to add new things in, say, 1.3 and fallback to 1.2 properties. So fallback's pretty cool. We think it'll get us a long way towards some of these scenarios and help kind of prevent fracture and fragmentation, but not as exciting as this expense report sample that we threw together. So this card is showing a whole bunch of things that are now only possible in 1.2. As an example, we have a new action called toggle visibility. And so you can attach it to, well, this is a select action on an image. And I can basically toggle the visibility of certain elements, including another image. That's where we're creating this illusion of this chevron turning, but really it's just toggling the visibility of one chevron that points down and one that points up. But it creates a pretty good user experience, all purely declaratively. And this is a large payload, but it's one that, you know, it's a great just kitchen sink payload of all these things that you can kind of see how toggle visibility works. So this image has a select action of toggle visibility, and then here are the elements that will be toggled, you know, on indication of that, and you can say they start visible. You can build some pretty neat stuff as I think this card is showing. Action set is a new element type that lets you put actions anywhere in the card, so now you don't have to put them just on the bottom. You can put an action set at the top of the card, and this just has one action in it. But it kind of shows the benefit or the flexibility we're adding to the schema to create even more visually rich and dense cards. Another thing I'll just show in here, it's a subtle thing, but it goes a long way towards creating visually appealing cards. And it's this concept of bleed. And bleed is a really simple property at the schema level, but really complicated at the renderer level. So the folks at Flutter and React Native, we're gonna have to work pretty closely with them and make sure that they understand the algorithm behind bleed. And the gist of it is we have a motto in adaptive cards that they're beautiful by default, or they're consistent by default. They always fall into a certain set of paddings and margins, and they look consistent with their surrounding UI. Because our objective, at least one of our objectives, is that if you're looking at an application, you shouldn't even know necessarily where the adaptive card is. It should blend in natively with the application around it. And that means it needs to follow the same type ramp, the same margins, and the same general grid that the app around it is. So bleed gives you the ability to break out of those rules intelligently and only where it makes sense. So we, without getting into all of the nerdy details, we basically calculate what the padding we would have applied around this thing. I could really just go to try it yourself and show you. The designer has a slight, at least last time. So as you can see, this gap is here in the designer. That's just a design artifact, but the real card itself is all the way butted up against the border. And so if I click on this and I turn bleed on or off, you can see now it's padded, and this is the way it's always been. And it still looks great. That looks good. Same with down here. We've effectively put bleed on one of these column sets. And you can see it just gives this illusion of, it helps create kind of rows. It just gives, it's a subtle thing, but it gives the visual aesthetic a level of depth that just wasn't possible before. And the nice thing about it is it's one property to you. You don't have to calculate margins, paddings. You don't have to know if there's anything above you or not. We do all this work to make sure that if you're bleeding, content will still not butt up against each other, including you could have nested bleeding and two elements bleeding. We do a lot of work to make sure that you're still going to get a beautiful by default card. So that's a lap around 1.2. Hopefully that's some exciting stuff. That's going to get us into these types of things we're going after for 1.3. The full feature list can be found here on this issue. And then adaptive cards that I always live and all the SDKs have been updated to start using it. So that was a quick lap around 1.2. I'll give everyone a second to, if they have any questions on it, we can take them. Otherwise, Andrew, I think we're going to switch over and talk about 1.3. So any thoughts, feedback? You going to use it?
Hi, Matt. This is Om Prakash.
Hi.
Hi. Yesterday, I think on Monday, we have downloaded 1.2 adaptive card version, and we tried to debug through bot emulator. The bot emulator version is 4.4.2, but when we tried to debug, it says like adaptive card 1.2 version is not supported here. So do we need to upgrade to latest version because we are already in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Would you mind shooting me an email? I'm just going to type it over here on Notepad. I don't know the process off the top of my head, how to upgrade the emulator. I know it uses the Bot Framework web chat library. It might be easy to upgrade web chat, which I think has a dependency on adaptive cards, and you can swap that in. I know they were making some headway towards letting you swap out the adaptive card version that comes bundled with it, but I don't have the details. So if you'd be okay emailing me, I'll put you in touch with the Bot Framework folks and they can help us figure out. And I'd like to know too, just for future reference.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other thoughts on the 1.2 stuff? Well, we'll come back to it if something comes to you. Andrew, you want to take it away and show us a little bit of the high level 1.3?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
The caveat here is this is very early. None of this stuff is gonna, be guaranteed to ship, and you should realize that you joining these community calls, you certainly do have direct influence over this list. This is just kind of where it's at right now.
Okay. So yeah, this is just a quick look at what we're thinking of planning for 1.3, and we just started planning now, so this is nowhere near final and just a first stab. And this is a good chance for some of you to share feedback with us about if you think some of these are really important, or if you think something should be here that isn't here. So this list is mostly sorted in priority order. Some of the things we're looking at accomplishing in 1.3 is we added that rich text block control that you can do fancy text runs, but we don't have underline support in there. So now you'll be able to underline a section of text inside a whole text block. We're looking at how we can solve making cards more responsive to different sizes. So part of that would be maybe some sort of media queries or some sort of solutions that you can create a card that looks great on wide screens and narrow screens. Maybe a concept of expanding and collapsing cards and having those gracefully expand with animations. One of the big things
we don't have any animations right now, huh? Like, I know people, even the toggle visibility, it's pretty abrupt. So we don't have any concept of animation. So if people have thoughts and feedback there, I think it's definitely one that butts up against, it's a tricky one, I guess I'd say.
And one of the big ones for 1.3 is an is required property on inputs. So you can say that this input needs to be filled in by the user. Otherwise, don't let them submit the card. And this is something that we were trying to get into 1.2, but it just came in too last minute. We didn't have enough dev time to finish it. And so this is going to be top of 1.3 here. And one cool thing to mention is, so this tool that we're using here is called Product Board. And it's a way for us to aggregate feedback from all of our customers. And you can see this user impact score. Here's how many people have asked for this. Like, this is a really top issue. And so we're able to prioritize by this, and then it integrates with GitHub. So as you can see, we can push these to GitHub and everything was to be tracked in GitHub in the public. But just a little insight of how the team is actually planning behind the scenes. So following from that, people also want more than just saying that the input is required. They might need some advanced validation, like making sure it's a valid email, or maybe even regex expressions. And so that's one that we'd love to hear if anyone does have any requirements there in terms of expressions. The other thing we want to try to solve is somehow unifying the action model. So today, if you're writing a card for Microsoft Teams and Outlook, you have to handle your actions separately on these two platforms if you want the card to return back inputs and data to you. So we want to try to solve that problem. And another problem is if you're using icons in your card and you're expecting the card to be a white theme with a white background, but then it gets displayed in a dark theme, like Microsoft Teams dark theme. You have no way to change that icon. So one of the big things we're looking at. We have some other things in here, like this is a searchable select menu that would be dynamically loaded. So if you have thousands of items that you need to be able to choose from, that would need to hit your server dynamically and pull those in. And also possibly allowing you to change options based on previous options. So maybe this could be like cascading drop downs, or if the user's selecting a project and they in the drop down select add new, you could show a new text box. Some of those scenarios have been some big requests from people. So I'm not going to run through all of these. So you can see them on the screen some here, and there's probably no chance we're going to get to shipping all of these in 1.3 either. So if there's anything that we talked about here or anything that we didn't talk about that you're seeing on the screen that you think is really important in 1.3, please just chime in right now and let us know.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.
And so another tool that we're going to be releasing soon is with this product board, there's a portal aspect to it. It's kind of like user voice. So hopefully soon we'll be releasing this and you'll be able to see this whole list of what we're working on. So this URL is actually public right now if you wanted to grab it, but we'll be releasing that link on our GitHub soon, and then you'll be able to see all these features that we're looking at building. And the great thing is you can actually tell us if it's critical or important to you and tell us why you need it so that we can actually understand how to build the best feature for you. So we're going to be pretty excited to share that in the next week or two on our GitHub.
Yeah, that'll be huge. I know folks ask kind of all the time, like, do we have a roadmap? And I kind of send people to GitHub, which is great for highly technical people, but this will be just a really nice kind of user-friendly view for folks. I'm really excited about that. Cool. So yeah, like Andrew said, if you have any feedback, thoughts on that, reach out to us. You don't necessarily have to use this public forum, but reach out to us or just file an issue on GitHub and say, hey, I heard 1.3 planning's underway, and have you considered this?
Yeah. Or even this portal, once we do share out the link, like I guess we can't even IM it out, but this portal, everything is private. So if you submit something here, it stays private just between you and us, and it's not public. So
yeah, that's actually really nice too.
And this is Dana. For those of you on the call too, we'll make sure that those resource links go into the blog post summary with the recording after this so that you can get to those places we're talking about.
Cool. Second to last major topic. So David, I have this project up. If you wanted to run through it, did you have a preference? Do you have it up and loaded, or?
I don't have it up and loaded on my machine, but I can talk through whatever you scroll through.
Sure. Yeah. So the gist is last week, David wrapped up and we shipped this adaptive cards templating library. So this has been a key ask from basically prototyping, and I will stress. So this is version alpha 1, but this will at least let folks start prototyping with the JavaScript version of the data binding library. And so it's shipped as a separate library. You can say, here's your template and here's your data, and ultimately you can create a data bound adaptive card. And the thing that I'll say real quick, because I know there's a couple folks on the call that I've been letting down via Twitter where they're asking about the Contoso demo from Build. So I want to highlight this. This was the main thing we were waiting to finish, because that demo uses a lot of the templating libraries. So that code will be coming next week. the sample project that we use at build. So that whole kind of kitchen sink demo, it'll use this heavily. And now that we can install the library and everyone else can as well. So yeah, the gist is here, I'll show the code and David can kind of run through it, but I basically got the project up. This is the example from the NPM project. So just at npm.js adaptive cards dash templating, and I've got it up right here, and it's that's it. This is the gist of it, but I've got it up in DevTools so you can kind of see what's going on. So what I'll do is hit refresh, hit this breakpoint, and we can kind of step it through right there. So David, you want to share what's going on in this code?
Sure, but there's really not much to it, right? The first is you need to have a template and some data. The template is essentially the skeleton of an adaptive card. It's a valid adaptive card itself, and that's what you can see at the, well, you can't see it anymore.
Sorry, yeah. I guess we kind of assume that everyone knows the data binding, so I was just real quickly going to pull up. So at our GitHub, at the Microsoft/GitHub/adaptive cards GitHub, there's a pinned issue at the top, a preview of this templating language, aka adaptive cards 2.0. And so this is where, and we've been, if you're curious or haven't seen any of this, you can learn a lot more if you go to our previous month's community calls where we introduce this and show designer prototyping, which really quickly I'll summarize too. We have a URL that we really only talk about with you folks on this community call, and it's vnext.adaptivecards.io. And this is where we could start playing with the prototyping. And so let's say, I've got my data over here, it's got first name, I've got a text block here, and I can say, I want to bind to, first name, using curly brace style syntax. I want to bind to a property. And we have this preview mode that effectively shows you what it would render with some sample data in there. And then obviously you would replace it. So this has all existed. This you can all play with. What's new, sorry to interrupt, David, is that now you can use this library to build stuff of your own. So that's where we're kind of right here. So you've got this template, and sorry, David, take it away.
I mean, there's just like a few words to add. As you can see, it's just a few lines of code to actually take that template, set the data object in that little context thing, set it as the $root, and then you call one method to expand. Expand is essentially the process of binding the data to the template and producing the output JSON, which in this particular case will be an adaptive card, and then render the adaptive card the way you've always done. Something to note, though, is that this library is, although it's going to be part of the adaptive card package, overall package, and SDK if you wish, it's really a JSON to JSON generic templating library. It can be used with any kind of template and output any kind of format. It doesn't have to be an adaptive card. So you can even use it for your own needs. The cool thing is that whenever we ship this thing, we will most likely have a version of that templating library for a bunch of platforms, not only JavaScript, but also .NET and maybe even iOS and Android. I'm not gonna sell something that might not happen, but that's the idea. So super simple, and you can go, you can jump in right now on NPM.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so this is the template. This is where I would effectively, if you built this in your designer, this is the card template. So you put this into that first variable, right? That's your template payload, and then the evaluation context $root. That's your real data, and that's it, right? And then you just say expand. So it's really just those three things. And so in the real world, this would come from your service. You would hit an endpoint, you would get the data, and this is effectively your data object. So your template would be stored somewhere, hosted somewhere, and injected here. And the whole hope with this, and why we're focusing primarily on JavaScript first, is just that a lot of people prototype in JavaScript. It's a pretty good language for just rapid development and prototyping. So For now, like David mentioned, we're just going to publish and maintain and evolve this templating library strictly to flesh out the specification, the data binding language itself before we get into the various implementations that we'll have. And there's some complexity to it. Again, I won't get into all the details, but if you are looking into the data binding stuff, this is probably your best place to go. The key things we're really fleshing out in here is when you start writing templating, you realize you need a handful of functions. And so we've started to flesh those out, but we need to make sure those functions work on every language. We want to make sure the syntax is good. We've debated amongst ourselves, should functions be scoped? Should, like, I know I had to write a template over a stock data and I needed to use like math.round effectively. So we're just trying to flesh out what the language itself should look like, and then we'll, towards release, make sure we support every platform that Adaptive Cards runs on. So this is where we really are trying to make it so it's very friction-free for you folks to tell us when you feel good with data binding. That is my unfortunate non-answer to when is it going to be released. And we aren't really holding ourselves to a date. We're hoping, that it won't be too long, but we really need you folks to start writing templates over your data. We just don't know what your data is like. We're assuming it's in some JSON format, since that's that's how tool is going to work in this particular case. But what are your dates serialized in? What type of formatting do you need? As I wrote a stock template, I realized, you always want 2 decimal places, right, when you present that. So you need some kind of formatting and various types of functions. So the hope with releasing this library, with having vnext.adaptivecards.io, is that we really are trying to just lower the bar and lower the friction to just trying it out. Tell us if it works. And the more we have people saying it's working, the more confident we have, and like, okay, I think we're probably done. This meets an MVP. So with that, let me pause and take a couple questions. And David, did you still want to show this last bit, the version selector, just prototype real quick?
Yeah, I can show it. It's just going to take 30 seconds. So I'll just take over the screen for a moment.
Yeah, boot that up. And while you're doing that, I'll just add. So feedback on this, reach out to us, or we'll take a room for questions as well. And again, like Dana said, all these links will be available.
All right, so we are continuing to evolve the designer. There's a lot that's happening in the code base itself and not much in the UI, but I just wanted to quickly share one of the new things that's going to come up in hopefully the next few weeks or whatnot, which is a version selector that helps author cards to target one specific version of the framework. The bottom line is, so you now have that selector, which lists all the versions that we've shipped, including that vnext that we haven't shipped yet, obviously. And if you go to the property inspector here, as you can see, those were the properties available for the text block in version 1. In version 1.1, you have that new hide property. In version 1.2, you now have that font type. So this is essentially a quick way to force the user into not using concepts that would not be supported in one particular target version. What's going to happen also is that those host containers here will be tied to the version that they actually support. Like, for example, web chat. I don't know what version they support right now, maybe 1.1. They don't yet support 1.2. So as you select this particular container, if you're already, if you're using version 1.2, it will prompt you and say, hey, web chat only supports 1.1. You want to switch to that version, which might mean that you're going to lose some of the constructs in the card that you're currently designing, but at least you won't produce something that might not work with the web chat control. That's basically it. And there will be more coming, including improvements to the user interface, to make it simpler, and that's all.
Is a question, you demoed this before, but now I just thought, so is the intention that even things like fallback would work here? So if you use...
Fallback is a complicated thing to do in a designer.
Yeah.
So there's no real plan to explicitly support fallback at this time. I mean, the designer is designed to address the long tail of simple scenarios, you know, where you don't want to spend too much time creating a good-looking card. Fallback is an advanced concept, so eventually, I suppose the designer will support, you know, a visual way of defining the fallback. But as of now, the JSON editor is your
actually been asking about defining it, but like, let's say I wrote rich text block and changed the target version to 1.1. Would fallback render there?
Yes. Eventually, essentially everything that's tied to a version will you know, be addressed properly. So as you design your card here, fallback will be in your JSON, but as you hit the preview mode, so preview mode essentially switches the designer into a view of the card that is the final view as it would be displayed in the target host application. That means that the data will be bound, but it also means that fallback is going to be used at that point, right?
Cool.
Whereas,
okay, yeah, that's good.
So yes, this is the kind of stuff that can be expected from that target version thing. Maybe not all features will be supported from the start, but progressively it will support more and more.
Cool, awesome. All right, folks. Well, I think that was our agenda and our topics. So let's open it up to some questions. Reach out to us if you have stuff. Otherwise, I know. If there are folks on the call, I know I'm getting settled back in from vacation, so I know there are some outstanding tweets. I apologize to some folks I haven't got back to yet. But yeah, any questions, thoughts on what you saw?
Can I jump in? Yeah, since no one else is going to ask questions, I'm a bit of a noob. I don't actually know what adaptive cards really is all about. Can you show us maybe a real life case, an example of where this would be used?
Yeah, so let me hang on real quick. I'll show a Teams bot. So the quick gist of where adaptive cards are used is really a whole bunch of different places that are potentially even unrelated. So if you want to integrate, say, into Microsoft Teams by writing a bot or using web chat or bot framework, adaptive cards is the technology of writing a bot and getting UI delivered into that app. So adaptive cards are really all about delivering UI into another experience that you may or may not own. So if that app supports adaptive cards like Teams does, like Outlook does, like Cortana does, like the Windows timeline, there's a handful of properties that support adaptive cards. You author these JSON adaptive cards and send them to that app, and then they get rendered natively in there. So really, though, the thing is, and it's always hard to kind of summarize, that's just one use case. If you happen to maybe be writing an app, you know, I would say note this YouTube link down. We actually do a good, I think we do a pretty good like recap for the first 10 minutes. Where you can really learn everything adaptive cards, going from the very simple to some kind of complicated stuff. But I was going to try and pull up a bot really quickly. I don't know how easily I can do that without revealing any potential stuff. Here, let me just go to this. This is our public stuff. So this is our Microsoft team where we have a dev channel, and we have a GitHub bot that effectively tells us when issues are open or pull requests are created. And these are all adaptive cards. We also have Azure DevOps integration here. So if a build gets kicked off, these are bots or cloud services that are basically delivering adaptive card content into Microsoft Teams. And you can see they're actionable. They can have buttons in them. I can click add comment. They're interactive, but they're these basically JSON serialized bits of UI or cards that get sent, they get rendered natively. So if I was in Teams Android or iOS app, that JSON would get then rendered natively. For the rest, though, I'd say just check out the video and hopefully adaptivecards.io, and you can always reach out to us too if you have any more specific stuff.
Cool, thanks.
Sure. Any other thoughts from anyone else?
Hi, good afternoon. Good day.
Hi.
Hi. I had a question with an example from the Graph API.
Mhm.
Maybe whether the integration and signaling from Graph API to adaptive cards is easy to establish.
So can you elaborate a little bit on, so you're hitting a Graph API, you're getting the data, and then what type of integration were you looking for?
Well, mainly deviations in secure score. So it's reporting secure score variations. So in the beta for Graph API, the secure score came back. Now, an adaptive card signaling that a change has been made would provide a simple action to be taken.
So I'm not familiar with secure score, but I assume so it returns just some data, right? I think I have the Graph Explorer. So the graph will return a bunch of JSON data. It's then up to you. In fact, templating would be an interesting thing. You know, I don't know what comes out of secure score, but let's just say it's a number.
That's about 60,000 lines I saw.
Of JSON?
That was quite a lot, yeah.
And it all comes back in a single response?
No, you can cap the response, but
okay.
If you
the general pattern is you've got some data. Even if it's really large data, it shouldn't really matter. It depends on when you want to display it or you want to make an action. You basically have to author the adaptive card payload, which then would bind to that data. So you can bind actions. One of the talks or one of the demos I built had an earlier one. I was going to try and see if I could grab the payload. It basically dynamically populates the actions based on it's this one right here. So it's showing a set of actions, you know, based on the data. So you can use the templating stuff, or you can generate adaptive card server side, if you will. But effectively, if you want to show an action in your adaptive card, you describe the adaptive card, you put in the actions, and then if you want to display data, you would then put those binding constructs in your adaptive card payload.
All right.
If I'm understanding correctly. And the thing that I would caveat is that if you're looking to do it in production, the data binding is in preview, so you could technically server generate an adaptive card. But I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering your question properly.
Well, basically, the adaptive cards, I don't know which approach is best. I got stuck on the blueprint, so comparing a blueprint with a secure score outcome, and as soon as it deviates, it signals. Yeah, it produces like an adaptive card.
I see. Like an adaptive card, or it is?
Yes, no. Having it available on all forms, it's that is definitely preferred. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I am happy to dive into this. I'm not.
I go back into the start with the Graph API and then work from there, because that's much easier, I think.
Yeah, so I would say, though, you know, we'll certainly help out. We can put you in touch with some Graph folks. The general pattern, though, is that the adaptive cards, as of today, they're not tightly coupled to the Graph. Adaptive cards is just an independent kind of rendering technology, display technology that may be used in other apps, or you can use it yourself. So there's really no tight coupling with Graph. The Graph is just one piece of data. You could get data from other things. It depends on when you want to generate that card or that action, and you want to send it into another app. What is the target where you want that action? Where would a user be expected to click on that action? Like Teams or Outlook or your own apps?
I was thinking Now, two ways it would signal, but it would cloud security app.
Is that a Microsoft app, or is that your guys' own, or is that?
That's Microsoft app. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the first step, I'm not familiar with that app. It might speak adaptive cards. It might, be able to take an adaptive card. If it doesn't, that's why I think the distinction between it's like an adaptive card or it is an adaptive card. The starter with adaptive cards is first the app you're targeting has to support adaptive cards. And so that's where over the last couple of years we worked closely with Teams, with Outlook, with Cortana, and we got a lot of Microsoft properties to standardize on adaptive cards. A lot of apps, even smaller ones beyond that, have also started standardizing on adaptive cards, but not all of them. So if that app you're looking to put content into does support adaptive cards, then you should be good to go. If they don't, or it's something like adaptive cards, but it's not quite adaptive cards.
No.
Yeah.
I would wish to look and see whether adaptive cards can be utilized for specific reporting and signaling. The trigger is indeed where the system needs to trigger an adaptive card. I've still got a long way to go, so thank you.
Sure, yeah, and reach out to us. We'll try and help out, or even if it's once you trigger that adaptive card and you've generated this JSON, your next step is, okay, I've got this JSON and I need to send it to something. It's up to that app. That client app needs to know what to do with it, and that's where it has to know how to render an adaptive card. And if it's a Microsoft property, or even if it's not, and you think that it'd be a compelling scenario for that app to enable it, we'd be happy to talk with them, Microsoft or not, to say, hey, adaptive cards might be a decent technology for rendering, specifically the client-side rendering. The signaling, the generating the card is one step of it, but then it ultimately has to get rendered in an app, and that's where our SDKs, our client-side SDKs, help take this JSON and turn it into something that a user can see and interact with. And that step, if you have someone that you'd like us, or you can just you send them to adaptivecards.io and say, hey, have you guys thought of this? It'd be, might help.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. Yes.
Sure.
Hey, Matt, can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
Hey, this is Peyton McManus. So we're building essentially sort of like an IAM service desk tool. We're going to use adaptive cards. Essentially, it's like a card library that can service up UI to Teams and to bot framework, web chat, and a whole bunch of other things to allow users coming in to select some routing options and enter problems and stuff like that. What about the different support levels against the different target? Like Teams is on, let's say, Adaptive Cards 1.0, and then web chat might be on a different version. How should we think about dealing with that? And then how do we know when Teams goes to 1.3 support, for example?
Yeah.
So I apologize. I might have missed something earlier.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So there's a little scene button at the designer called Host App Docs. I probably can come up with a better term for that, but it basically launches this page, which is a status of the major Microsoft platforms and the current version that they're on. Yeah. So it's not a great answer. My answer is effectively with what we have today is you would go to this page and kind of keep an eye on it. We don't necessarily have a blog or anything yet. We're trying to find more ways, especially as we interact with more of the community. This is mainly our forum on how we announce things and kind of push information. The rest of our sources are kind of like poll, and you have to know where it is. So that's just one part of it, is just knowing what version you're on. The piece that you missed that I'll just quickly run through, but once the call's up, you can go back to it, is we announced Adaptive Cards 1.2 last week. And one of the features in that is a feature called Fallback, where you can say, I'm trying to render this element, a graph, or actually in 1.2, we added a thing called a rich text block. But if you sent that, now the caveat here is this is from 1.2 going on. Let's wrap this one up. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you again in 4 weeks. And please do find us, reach out to us, especially now that we're in 1.3 planning and data binding is making progress. This is a great time for you folks to kind of tell us what we're doing right.